So I'm here with Jessica Yaager, the Executive Director of NYU Furman Center. Could you please tell us a little bit about the background of New York City's affordable housing policy? What interest does it serve? What policies does it promote? Why do you have it?
Well, New York City has had a robust affordable housing program for decades now. The reason for it is that there is need that the market isn't serving. I think today that need is greater than it's ever been, and the city's affordable housing program in response to that need is more robust than it's ever been. But I mean, the basic problem in the city today is that the real estate market is so hot that the market is not meeting the needs of millions of New Yorkers. There's overwhelming demand to live here. New York City's population is at an all-time high. Employment is at an all-time high, and rents are extremely high. Yet, the median income has been stagnant for close to a decade now, and so there's this incredible growth in New York City. At the same time, that there's still a large part of the population that's having a hard time keeping up and meeting the rent demands that the market is providing.
But affordable housing is not just about housing, is it? It's about really creating mixed communities.
Absolutely.
Where people of low income, mid income, high income can live together. What's the rationale behind that?
I mean, over time, there's been a movement to recognizing the importance of having mixed income and diverse neighborhoods, and the role that affordable housing plays in that has been acknowledged over time. And the current administration's affordable housing plan makes that a central part of its goal. And certainly the mandatory inclusionary housing program that you mentioned is a big piece of that. But I think there are lots of reasons why that's an important policy goal in New York City and other cities like it. I think, when you have a city where more and more neighborhoods are being walled off to large segments of the population, you really run the risk of losing the diversity and the vitality that makes a city like New York what it is. And there's also substantial evidence that shows that concentration of poverty is not good for people. It's not good for children. I mean, there's research that shows that children benefit from growing up in mixed income communities. Their long-term job market outcomes are better, educational outcomes are better for kids, and that, of course, translates to the health of the city.
Often we hear the argument that poor people are better off living in poor areas rather than with people where they can't have the same lifestyle, they'll feel alienated. What has the New York experience taught us about this?
We did some work at the Furman Center this past year looking at the experience of low-income households who are living in neighborhoods that have gentrified around them, and whether there's evidence that people are better off or not because of that gentrification. And it was really an interesting study. I mean, what we found was that empirically, on the things that we could measure, people were better off. People who were living in public housing, for example, one of the places we looked at was Chelsea, which is a high-income neighborhood just uptown from here. People who were living in public housing in that neighborhood and the few others that we looked at had, the kids had higher test scores. There were other measures that empirically people were doing better. But there was also a qualitative aspect of the research that was done by a partner organization, and what they found is that that was not the experience of the residents. That the residents felt alienated from their communities. They felt that the community was no longer for them, and they didn't necessarily perceive the benefits that we were able to see through these measures. So I think that anxiety that people feel, that low-income people feel about the ways that the city changes around them and the ways that makes them vulnerable is very real. But I think that the answer isn't to say, well, then we shouldn't be encouraging, diverse neighborhoods. I think it's a question about how do we plan for neighborhoods? How do we use other planning tools to make sure that neighborhoods are diverse, not just the housing opportunities in those neighborhoods, but the shopping opportunities and the connections so that people are able to access jobs and other things, other amenities that come into a neighborhood. That's part of why we think, it's a large part of why we think diverse neighborhoods are important, is that it means that low-income people are able to access better services and better amenities that exist. But if there aren't those bridges that allow people to access, if there's barriers, that's a problem. That's a policy problem that we should be trying to solve.
What are the major tools that have been used over the years to create affordable housing in mixed income communities?
New York City puts a lot of just direct subsidy dollars into the development of affordable housing. It does that through direct subsidy to support the construction of housing and the rehabilitation of housing that then is rented at below market rents. It's also done that, it's also provided subsidy through providing property owners relief on their property taxes. And in fact, there was a large program in New York City that actually expired this year that was that was a property tax abatement that resulted in the production of thousands and thousands of units over many decades. The city has also used zoning and zoning allowances and bonuses to encourage the development of below market units, and that of course is the inclusionary zoning program. Since 1987, New York City has had a voluntary inclusionary zoning program where basically a private developer could opt in to participating in certain parts of the city, not everywhere, but in certain parts of the city, a developer could say, in order to get the zoning bonus, I'm willing to provide a certain percentage of units in my new building at below market rents, and that's another important tool, the zoning power. The price of land in New York City is certainly if not certainly one of the largest impediments to the development of housing. So that's driving up prices, and city-owned land is an incredible resource. You can build affordable housing without having to have an affordable housing developer meet the bid of a market rate developer for that land, and so it's an incredibly valuable resource. There's just less and less of it over time.
Let's talk a little bit about the new program, the
Yes.
mandatory inclusionary housing, which you adopted earlier this year.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about what the main principles, the main tenets of this program is?
Sure. So the basic idea is that whenever, in the parts of the city where this program will apply, which is not everywhere, but in those parts of the city, when the city engages in a zoning change that increases the capacity for residential building, when a new building is built in that area, a certain percentage of the units in that building will have to be affordable. And I can talk a little bit about how the city defines affordable. The city will impose one of two options. Option one is that 25% of the new units that are being built have to be set aside for below market. And in that case, if the set aside is 25%, then the average income that the units will serve is at 60% of the area median income. Basically, it looks at the income of the household and then makes a judgment that a household shouldn't be spending more than 30% of their income on rent.
Okay.
So what it does is it says that it takes the median income of the area, and then it basically defines that this housing will be serving a low-income subset of the population, saying that if the median income is $100,000, that you'll be making in order to be eligible, you have to make no more than 60% of that median. Then in addition to you always have to have one of those two options, but then in addition, the city can choose in a particular instance to implement what it's calling a deep affordability option, where 20% of the units are set aside for households that are making 40% of the area median income. So at the end of the day, it's this sort of the sliding scale relationship between the number of units that are affordable versus the income that it's serving. And as the city requires there to be more units, that's the way it's designed is that if it's more units, it's serving higher income households, but if there's fewer units, it's serving lower income households. The real way in which this is different than the policy that the city has had, as I mentioned, since 1987, is that it's required. If you own a building in one of these areas and you are redeveloping it and the policy applies in your area, then you are required to make these units affordable if you're building a new residential building. In the past, it's been a voluntary program. So basically, the city had to provide a density bonus to help offset that cost of providing the affordable units, and an owner could say, I don't want that, it's not worth it to me, right? But now that option is off the table.
Thank you very much. This has been very helpful.